Okay, today is the 18th of February 2023, and we'll talk about two architects, both very important. One of them a giant, Michelangelo Buonarroti, but we'll only talk about him as an architect today. Although, of course, he was more than an architect, and we all know this. And then we'll talk about Baldassare Longhena, a very important architect himself. We'll start with Michelangelo. We'll read a little bit about his a very short notice or note about his biography. This is apparently him. Well, you know, he also depicted himself in a rather moving way in the Sistine Chapel. But again, we are only talking about him as an architect, about this formidable artist. So Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, his name is longer than usually known, was born on March 6th, and we'll talk again about him on March 6th. So a little less than 2 weeks from now, if I counted well. I didn't count well. Anyway, on March 6th, we'll talk about him both as a, not both. We'll also talk about him as a draftsperson, no, we couldn't describe him as a draftsperson. His drawings, his paintings, his sculptures, and again, probably as him as an architect. He died on the 18th of February, 1564, known as Michelangelo. Michelangelo was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet of the High Renaissance. Born in the Republic of Florence, his work was inspired by models from classical antiquity and had a lasting influence on Western art. Michelangelo's creative abilities and mastery in a range of artistic arenas defined him as an archetypal Renaissance man, along with his rival and elder contemporary Leonardo da Vinci. Given the sheer volume of surviving correspondence, sketches, and reminiscences, Michelangelo is one of the best documented artists of the 16th century. He was lauded by contemporary biographers as the most accomplished artist of his era. He lived a long life. He arrived at almost 89 years old, as opposed to Leonardo da Vinci, his so-called rival, who died, I think, 66 or 68. Anyway, Michelangelo lived for 20 more years. Let's see his architectural works. St. Peter's Basilica, which he didn't finish. I mean, it was not finalized, completely based on his design, but he had a major role because the dome of St. Peter's belongs to him. Everybody knows St. Peter's, of course, but maybe less known, well, maybe a little bit less known is the fact that he, the actual shape of this important building for Christianity and architecture was decided in the end by Maderno, who made a longer nave, much longer, and also the facade of the building was designed by Maderno. But the dome, the closest that comes to God, if God is up there, was designed by Michelangelo. His scheme was, or his design was closer to what Bramante planned. There were other plans for St. Peter. Raphael worked too, but Michelangelo was present at St. Peter, although he never really considered himself as an architect. He was a sculptor, but because of his immense ability in all arts, he was asked to also build buildings, and he built. Here we see some Pietro also from with the colonnade by Bernini on the right. So again, the greatest artists of the time contributed to, the important buildings of the time. Here we see receding in the back the San Pietro, and then left and right Bernini's colonnade. This is what is this? Principal high buildings of the old pyramid, and San Pietro had to be there too. But soon we'll also place the Romanian cathedral in Bucharest. I passed by it almost today, and I saw it from a distance with the scaffolding and all the rest still laboring on it. Anyway, but you see these cathedrals, they didn't achieve the height of the pyramids, but they were not too far away from the top of the pyramids either. Anyway, yeah, the climax of Christian architecture. A conjectural view of the old St. Peter's Basilica. This was before this was built. There existed an old basilica, and here is an approximation of, from what they think existed there. This was from 1891. But from here to the actual building to now, or during the time when it was built, it was a long distance. San Pietro. Now Bramante's plan, I mentioned him because Bramante was the first one to make a proposal for the new San Pietro. And this is the plan of Bramante, himself a great architect. And if we are to consider just Il Tempietto by Bramante, is enough to, place him on the list with the greatest architects of the Renaissance. Raphael's plan, very different from Bramante. It's interesting, it could have been a very different San Pietro. So Bramante, Raphael, Michelangelo. You see there is a similarity to an extent between Bramante and Michelangelo. And then Maderno finalized the building. The central part, what we look at here remained as designed by Michelangelo, but Maderno added a long nave, perhaps, kind of a reference, maybe, I don't know if it was done consciously, to the plan by Raphael. So we had four major plans: Bramante, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Maderno. Here we see all three of them. And no, actually, we do not see Raphael here. We see Bramante, we see Michelangelo, and we see the finalized San Pietro with Michelangelo's. This part remained, but the facade and the long nave belong to Carlo Maderno. So Raphael, Bramante, Michelangelo, Maderno, and this is the final plan of the building as we see it today. This part remained as Michelangelo designed it, with the exception of the entrance into the building. And here we see also the old basilica, the old St. Peter's from the 4th century. So 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years passes the old St. Peter's and what these architects proposed and actually built through Maderno in the end. It's a vast building. It's the summum of Christian architecture in a way. Bramante's dome. This is what Bramante designed. But this is not, I think, a drawing from his time. It's a later drawing. Then San Gallo. San Gallo proposed an interesting San Pietro. I forgot to mention him, as you can see it, but it was not considered. But it would have been interesting in a way. It's more exotic with those two spires, left and right, and then the dome in the center. St. Peter's Basilica from Castel Sant'Angelo, showing the dome rising behind Maderno's facade. Here it is. The dome again belongs to Buonarroti Michelangelo. The engraving by was published 1569, 5 years after the death of Michelangelo. So he died in 1564 on this day, the 18th of February. And here is the engraving. The dome was brought to completion by Giacomo della Porta and Fontana. So even the dome was not actually completed by Michelangelo, but it was based on his design. There are countless famous pages of criticism and theoretical work about what Michelangelo did here. But in this short presentation, we'll have just a review, kind of an aide-memoire of his contribution to architecture. Here we see the baldachin by Bernini underneath. Michelangelo's plan extended with Maderno's nave and narthex. We already saw this plan by Maderno. It looks small here on our screens, but it's giant, it's huge. Maderno's facades with statues of St. Peter and St. Paul flanking the entrance stairs. The Pope, gives speeches from here, from the balcony. And you see at the bottom, there are probably, I don't know if the chairs are to be seen now, but the populace of Rome and tourists, countless tourists gathered here in front of the cathedral, and the Pope shows up, and it's a very festive occasion. I remember when once at Easter, I wanted to make a video, kind of a film with Easter in Rome, and I went here to in front of the cathedral, and there were countless people, and I was near a policeman, and I was amused to photograph his incredibly glittering boots, leather black boots, extremely shining. And I was filming the policeman's boots, and then I was zooming in the Pope on the balcony, and I felt it was kind of a strange dialogue, so to speak, between the policeman and his boots, his leather boots, and the highest ranking official in the church hierarchy. The apse with St. Peter's Cathedral, supported by 4 doctors of the church. The altar with Bernini's baldacchino, we already saw it a little bit. Baroque architecture and sculpture of the highest order. Bernini's Cathedra Petri and Gloria. Maderno's facade in the back, the dome by Michelangelo. Left and right, the beginning of the colonnade by Bernini. And here we see again the vastness of the space in front of San Pietro. The Pietà by Michelangelo is in the north aisle of San Pietro, a very famous sculptural work by Michelangelo. I mean, if one did just this work in his lifetime, and it would have been a great accomplishment, but this is just, one work between so many. by this man who totally dedicated himself to art. The inauguration of Pope Francis in 2013, Porta Pia, another work by Michelangelo's gateway to history. This is a building I never quite understood, and maybe because of my insufficient knowledge about it, I was more interested actually in a work across the street by Denis Lasden, the Embassy of Great Britain, a modern building, the Embassy of Great Britain in Rome. If you go to Rome, Porta Pia is very close to the railway station, Stazione Termini, and so is the aforementioned British embassy in Rome by a very important architect himself, Denis Lasden. But this one confused me, and it's not very clear to me. Did Michelangelo work only on the gates themselves, or also in the building between the two gates? Because there are two gates. You see here one, and then one here. But I don't know about this building. This was done by Michelangelo. I don't know, but I'm sure it's easy to find out. It's just that for some reason I didn't resonate a lot with the building. I don't know. I'm a little bit confused actually about Michelangelo as an architect. But I'm not confused about certain parts of his work as an architect, and I will underline, those specific works when we arrive there. For example, this work actually doesn't move me a lot, and maybe I'm insensitive, maybe something wrong with me. It is by Michelangelo, but I don't know. It doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't impress me. But this drawing by him does impress me, and is on the cover of a beautiful book about Michelangelo, architect by Carlo Giulio Argan, a very important critic, Italian critic and theoretician of culture and art. So this is near the railway station in Rome, Porta Pia. I don't insist on it. Now we arrive at something else, at the Laurentian Library, Biblioteca Laurentiana, truly a very important work, and with an astonishing staircase or stair that arrives at the level of the library itself. This is the plan of the building. I'm sure you know this vestibule, if we are to call it so prosaically, is magnificent. And then the library itself is this long space here. But what Michelangelo was able to achieve here is some kind of a exteriority, as an interiority, or he brought the exterior into the interior. This is an enclosed space. This is an interior space, but it has the feeling as if it is somehow surrounded by exterior facades. This stair, and this stair is like a volcanic lava, is like a volcano that, like the lava of a volcano that comes towards you. And maybe it's unusual because he filled the whole space, the whole room, if we are to call it a room, with a stair. But the stair has a symbolic meaning. Maybe some kind of a in between knowledge, which is symbolized by this room, and the entrance into the realm of knowledge is via this dramatic sculptural stair. Here we see the plan of the library is close to the great building by Brunelleschi, San Lorenzo, and the library, the Laurentian, the Biblioteca Laurentiana is here. If you arrive in Florence, this is a must see, you know, but there are many wonders. It's not just this library by Michelangelo. This is the most dramatic space, in fact, part of the Biblioteca Laurentiana. And this staircase is very moving because it is it's not a functional statement, it's a symbolic statement of the highest order. Also, there are very sophisticated things here, like with these two columns. I hope I have relevant pictures. It's, again, it's art. Those who say that architecture is not art are wrong. I mean, architecture that deserves its name, because there is a lot of so-called architecture that doesn't deserve its name, and that is not art. It's true. But you need an artist to do something like this. I don't think a bookkeeper or a, you know, I don't know. I could add to the bookkeeper. I have nothing against the bookkeeper. My father was a bookkeeper. Well, he was an accountant. But this is not his job. This is the job of an artist. And this is the library itself, that long, elongated space. I never visited it. I never entered it. I hope Bogdan Botoi is here because he knows some things about this library that I don't. Anyway, Biblioteca Laurentiana in Florence, part of this amazing ensemble. You know, it's San Lorenzo by Brunelleschi, which is a famous building, and then this building, some kind of a monastery, and then the library by Michelangelo, and then these are the chapels. This is by Brunelleschi, and then there is the Medici chapel, and you know, you have Michelangelo there, you have Brunelleschi, you have, I hope I have here, but I don't know, because we might talk about them in March when it will be his birthday, about the famous Medici chapel. You see, this is what is intriguing, that these facades of the interior walls of this so-called vestibule actually remind one of a possible exterior architecture, of the facade of, you know, a building towards the outside, not towards the inside. So he brought the outside inside, but it's done, you know, it's done. I mean, literally, here we have, these are not functional windows. They are, but I wouldn't do them justice if I call them ornamental, because they are so dramatic and sculptural, but they are in essence ornaments. They are not, you know, you cannot look through that window. It doesn't function as a window. It's a blocked window. Now, why did he make them like this? At this point, I don't know enough, and I'm not inspired enough to speculate, but I'm sure he did these things with a meaning. This is probably the most symbolically charged stair towards knowledge that was ever made. It's not a complicated work, actually. It has elements of the Baroque architecture, but it's not, you know, shocking. But on the other hand, it is unusual to fill a room with a stair. So again, the functionalist would lose his mind here because these elevations, inner elevations of this so-called vestibule actually don't serve a function. They do have here access to light, but what about here is, why did he do this? And on the other hand, was it something wrong with what he did? I don't think it is. Plastically, is sublimely accomplished. So was he an architect? Of course he was. But he was also a poet and a painter, and whatever he did was done, in superlative terms. Don't know if I remember well, and I should have because it's an important information, but I think initially this was meant to be open. And maybe this explains why the elevations, well, the walls towards the inside are done as if they were towards outside, if this was opened, or at least to have glass or something. So right now it is as we see it here. Biblioteca Laurențiană. I mean, just this fake window is worth writing an essay about, if not a novel. Some digital drawings, because the work fascinates today as it did when it was made. I don't know very well why I attached them to the presentation, but I did. The Sagrestia Nuova of the Medici Chapel was left incomplete by Michelangelo. Yes, I'm glad I have this. So this chapel, the Medici Chapel, is, in my opinion, very, very important, and not only my opinion. And I reflect a lot on it, and I mention it a lot. Why? Because in this chapel, I think Michelangelo, who had, I think, some kind of a dualistic interpretation of the world, depicted two brothers, Giuliano de' Medici, and we see Giuliano de' Medici right here in this picture, and across the room, Lorenzo de' Medici. Giuliano was symbolized vita activa, the active life. He was the warrior. While Lorenzo de' Medici, his brother, was the thinker, the poet, the philosopher. So Lorenzo de' Medici symbolized vita contemplativa, the contemplative life, while Giuliano, whom we see here, symbolizes vita activa, the active life. Here we see his brother, Lorenzo, but from what I read, the actual brothers are not buried here. They are buried somewhere else. I don't know exactly why this happened. We read that this was left unfinished by Michelangelo. It's possible he went to Rome for other assignments, maybe San Pietro. And this is in Florence, of course. But this duality, vita activa, vita contemplativa, Giuliano de' Medici, Lorenzo de' Medici, facing each other, make one think about, in a way, the great dualities of life. And at the bottom, we see the night and the day, and the dawn and the dusk. The poet is closer to, the dawn and the dusk, and the active man is, connected, so to speak, with the day and the night. it's very possible that indeed Michelangelo acted in accord with his own saying, pittura et una cosa mentale, but not only painting, sculpture as well, and architecture as well. So there is symbolism here, and I think in architecture we should attempt to not forget symbolism, because very often we forget about our works do not symbolize anything. But in the absence of symbols, I think architecture could become very, very prosaic. Giuliano, Lorenzo, Giuliano, Lorenzo. I will talk more on March, on his birthday, about these sculptures in the Medici Chapel, which is part of this complex of buildings with the Lorenzo, San Lorenzo and Biblioteca Laurenziana. I look at this, it is magnificent as an architecture. I mean, not mentioning the sculptures now, as architecture is perfect. So, was he an architect? Yes, he was. This is Giuliano. They died young, both of them. I think Giuliano was murdered at 25 or something. And Lorenzo didn't live much longer, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Michelangelo's Palazzo Farnese, where the French embassy to Italy is, Palazzo Farnese, but he worked here with other architects. I think he was responsible for the facade. That corniche and I don't know, even if the whole facade was made by him. The French obviously are wise, you know, to have the French embassy in a building where Michelangelo was involved, and other important architects. It's a very prestigious building, and you know, what can we say? Probably Putin envied the choice of the French. So Palazzo Farnese in Rome, where Michelangelo is involved, but I'm not very sure exactly what he did, with the exception of the facade or parts of the facade. It was common then, you know, for larger works to have a number of architects involved, not just one. The inner court is a cube, as you can see in the section and in the plan. This drawing was done later, not during his time, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The staircase of the Palazzo Senatorio was one of Michelangelo's great remodels. Here we are in Piazza Campidoglio in Rome again, and in my invitational message to this presentation, I showed an image from the air of Campidoglio. Here is the Emperor Mark Aurelius, and but now is a copy, is not the original work. The original work was removed and from here to be saved. And apparently this staircase was done by Michelangelo. He remodeled it, but maybe the most amazing thing is the design of the square itself. I think he worked also on the elevations of these two buildings. So we are in the Campidoglio square in Rome, another important touristic destination or attraction. There is a great movie, Nostalgia by Andrei Tarkovsky, where at the end of the movie, a so-called madman gives a very passionate and tragic speech, standing on behind the Emperor Mark Aurelius on the horse, and then he puts himself to fire. And his last words are Zoe, Zoe. But Zoe in Greek, that was the name of his wife who died, but Zoe also means in Greek life, life. Please see Nostalgia by Andrei Tarkovsky, one of the greatest movies ever made. And you'll see this scene in the end in Il Campidoglio, where Michelangelo was very involved. This staircase, we read that it was remodeled by him. Actually, now that I mention Nostalgia, in that section of that film, the so-called madman Domenico, he states that we need greatness, we need mentors, we need greatness, cultural greatness, and I am tempted to agree with him. It's not about a grandiloquent, because true greatness is also modest, but about genuine greatness, not an inflated greatness, no, with a big chest, inflated, not that kind of greatness. A modest greatness, but genuine greatness, artistic, cultural greatness. Do we have it? Maybe sometimes we have it, but the noise around us maddens us. You know, we don't know any longer who are the true stars. We think the true stars are the, you know, the prosaic ones, the commercial ones, but it's not so. I'm sure there are great poets today and you know, important artists, important intellectuals, but some of them are not stars. They are not known. They are not known because they don't make noise. So, Il Campidoglio, Rome. Michelangelo redesigned the original medieval facade of the Palazzo dei Conservatori in the Campidoglio Square. He redesigned this facade, as I mentioned earlier. There is a project, built project by Arata Isozaki, who died recently and who received the Pritzker Prize in Architecture, where the design of the square is almost, I mean, very explicitly, you know, incorporated into the design of a square in what he built in Japan, Arata Isozaki. I hope I have images with the design of the square, because I think it's very impressive. But again, Michelangelo redesigned the facade of this palazzo, on both sides. I think they have different names and serve different functions. But this whole square, you know, its feeling, it's generated by the contribution of Michelangelo. And again, Mark Aurelius, the emperor on the horse in the center. The emperor who was a philosopher, or a philosopher who was an emperor. Here we see a little bit the design of which is rather complex, and it's still like this today. Here it is. Again, please try to see Nostalgia by Andrei Tarkovsky. You'll see at the end a lady, an important character in the movie, running up the stair because she feels or she knows that Domenico is going to put himself to death in fire, on fire, here on top of the horse behind Mark Aurelius in this famous square and this famous place in Rome, sending us an ominous message to stop destroying the world, to stop polluting the world. Zoe, Zoe. And there are some people like Levi-Strauss who thinks that art is long and life is short. No, that art is short and life is long. The Latin saying ars longa vita brevis means art is long and life is short. In a way, it's true because I contemplate this square designed by Michelangelo and I see the power of art. It crosses the frontiers between centuries. But Levi-Strauss was right too, in a sense, that like Le Corbusier said, life is always right in the end. Anyway, life without art is as bad as life as art without life. They need each other, I would say. Michelangelo's grand design, the Palace of the Holy Office. I don't know about this. Is it a grand design? I found these words. They are not mine. I usually don't like palaces and maybe even less of the Holy Office. Why does it have to have a palace? Anyway, maybe I'm a masochist. I don't like, so-called spiritual affluence. Santa Maria degli Angeli e dei Martiri was Michelangelo's final great work. And this is, it's towards the outside, we see ruins of Diocletian building, maybe a bathroom, a public bath. And but the church, Santa Maria degli Angeli, which is right in front of the Stazione Termini, and not far away is Porta Pia, as we already saw. This work is inside from the outside. Of course, you wouldn't think there is Michelangelo here, but it is. Anyway, but even the great Michelangelo, I don't think he can easily compete with at least with the thickness of the walls of a Roman emperor. I mean, look at the massivity, the drama of those walls. Those are from the Roman times. The building here is from the Roman times. I mean, we are talking about, different scale in a way. The interior, I think it was changed. I don't see Michelangelo here because of the vast decorations. There is, I don't see the purity of the space any longer. As we see it, and the genuineness of the work of Michelangelo, we saw it in Biblioteca Laurenziana. But here there are too many decorations and distractions in a way. The space is maybe very moving, but because of these accessory, so to speak, it becomes, for me at least, not very moving. I mean, I don't see Michelangelo here because it's too much aesthetical distraction on the walls, especially when the resolution of the picture is not great. I'm sorry about it. Anyway, perhaps yes, the grandeur of the space is what inspired that writer to say the grand. I don't like this word either. Grand. It's so catchy. It's for the tourists. Michelangelo also designed forts, and here you are going to see the genius of this man in his sketches. In this case, architectural sketches. They are very powerful and very modern and very tensioned. Here they are. I mean, sketches for force, dealing with war. But the drawings are very expressive, almost expressionistic. They are very modern. You see his genius at work. You see his tension, his intensity. I love these drawings. If Michelangelo did nothing else but these drawings, I think he would have deserved, a high position in the history of art, just based on these sketches. Just as Le Corbusier, looking just at the sketches he did when he was traveling through Europe, Eastern Europe, and he passed through Romania too, he made some sketches and they were published in a book, Journey to the East, translated into English with this title, and you can find it. But those sketches show clearly genius. And he was, I don't know, 22 years old. It was your age. Here again, these sketches are full of life and of tension, of intensity, of drama. And they're just sketches, but they are alive. For me, they are alive. Who cares that the page has those brown dots because of the age of the paper? I wouldn't care, because the spirit of the drawing is still intact. Here we see in the background some silhouettes, other drawings by. Can you imagine? He drew sketches for the forts on top of probably masterful drawings. I also read that at one point in his life, he destroyed many of his works. And it's very possible at least some of them, of those works, if not all of them, were masterpieces. He destroyed them. Now here we see he destroyed in a way, but I like this hybrid drawing as it is, with a sketch for a fort on top of, of two silhouettes that are beautifully drawn. A madman, a beautiful man, a sublime man, probably an impossible man. Okay, and now we go to the, as I said, I have to leave at 7:30. Now we'll go to another interesting architect. Well, I shouldn't put it this way. We cannot say another interesting architect after Michelangelo, as if Michelangelo was just an interesting architect. Baldassare Longhena, who was active in Venice, but as a Baroque architect. Not a bad architect if we consider his main work, but not just his main work. Let's read a little bit about him. So when he was born, Michelangelo was already dead for 34 years. So after the death of Michelangelo Buonarroti, Baldassare was born 34 years later. In 1598, he lived alone like two, not as long as Michelangelo, but still 84. as opposed to Palladio, who died at 72. Baldassare Longhena. You see, he died on the day of 18th February. We don't know the date of birth, but we know the year, 1598. Was an Italian architect who worked mainly in Venice, where he was one of the greatest exponents of Baroque architecture of the period. Baldassare Longhena. Born in Venice, Longhena studied under the architect Vincenzo Scamozzi, and after Scamozzi's death, completed his monumental Procuratio Nuove in San Mark's Square, a complex of imposing residences and offices for officials of the Venetian Republic that gives the square its appearance today. Too bad I had a presentation on him and I couldn't find it. It's probably on one of those many USB sticks that I cannot recuperate the content from. They simply are not read by my tired laptop. But I created a new presentation, this one, but I didn't include this work, which anyway, it was just, he completed the work of Scamozzi. It is mainly the work was begun by Scamozzi. His best known work is the elegantly decorated Basilica di Santa Maria della Salute, an important silhouette in Venice, begun in 1631 to thank the Virgin for the city's deliverance from the plague. So they had a pandemic too. In 1631, he was 33 years old, so still a young man. These two domed church on the peninsula between why these two domed churches should have been, I took this from Wikipedia, not everything is fine on Wikipedia. Dome churches on the peninsula between the Canal Grande and the Zatere is one of the city's best known landmarks. Now, I think two should have been written TOO, or I don't know. Anyway, the main entrance, modeled on the Roman triumphal arch, was later copied in successive churches and cathedrals in Venice and elsewhere. It is a famous church, Santa Maria della Salute, Venice, 1631. That's when the work began on it, and it's a Baroque church. He designed many other churches in the city, among them the Chiesa dell'Ospedaletto, you are going to see it, and Santa Maria di Nazareth, you are going to see it, built between 1656 and 1680, although the facade of the latter church was designed by Giuseppe Sardi. He also designed the Palazzo Belloni Battaglia, you are going to see, and the Palazzo Giustiniani Lolin, both facing the Grand Canal, the Canal Grande. One of his largest designs was the Chioggia Cathedral. You are going to see it executed between 1624 and 1647. So in 1624, he was 26 years old. Actually, this cathedral was before Santa Maria della Salute. On the completion of the cathedral, he designed two other palaces on the Grand Canal of Venice, Ca Rezzonico and Ca Pesaro, but those I didn't include in this presentation. Both completed after his death. Between 1641 and 1680, he designed the new library, the grand staircase, the monastery facade, the novitiate building, the sick room, and the guest room of Santa Maria Maggiore, San Giorgio Maggiore, sorry, a monastery. Yeah. Here he was. I mean, the depiction is probably from a later time, or it's some kind of a composite drawing done with newer technologies. But it appears to be an approximation of some truthfulness about how this man looked like. Baldassare Longhena. And now he's maybe the most important work, Basilica di Santa Maria della Salute, Venice. And you probably know it if you visited Venice, and if you didn't yet visit Venice, this year is a good year because the Venice Biennial does take place in the summer. Well, all the way to the fall. maybe you should wear a mask. I don't know. I read sometimes that the Italians still have the pandemic. People die every day in a certain number, not as many as in Germany, but they still do. And this is the church by Longhena, Santa Maria della Salute. Unfortunately, I was unable to enter it when I went there with students, but we contemplate it from the outside. Anyway, you can miss it if you are in Venice because you can see it almost from everywhere. It's a massive church. It stands out, and it is indeed a touristic attraction and a famous building in a city with other, of course, important buildings by important architects. In this building on the left, for example, you can see Tadao Ando. He was asked to remodel. Unfortunately, they asked for a big price to get into the exhibition spaces of what they have here, some kind of foundation, museum. But yes, Tadao Ando did here work, and not an unimportant work, a major work. But yes, the entrance ticket is expensive. I'm talking about this building here. Sorry, it's not this building, it's this one. Very close to Santa Maria della Salute. And then we have here Palladio, and Venice is Venice. And here is the interior, even if I was unable to enter, but I was able to enter it on the web, thanks to the internet. Longhena, Giuseppe, not Giuseppe, now I say Giuseppe. I have a problem with Baldassare Longhena. There are other Baldassare, like Peruzzi. There are several architects who have the first name Baldassare. Santa Maria Novella. They say that it has a complex geometry, and it looks like it. I mean, if we look at the interior, and it's so good actually to have churches without chairs, and I think they were meant to be like this, not with chairs, although chairs are very appealing to the tired tourist. I enjoy them too, but architecturally speaking, churches should not have places to sit in front of God. How could you sit on a chair in the house of God? Here it is in Venice. So you have Piazza San Marco. One of these two buildings was completed by Longhena. I am always a little bit confused which one, because they are very similar. Maybe this one is the new one. And yes, because he was a Baroque architect, it's possible he completed the facade of this building. And yes, San Marco, and here is Santa Maria della Salute, major presence, architectural presence on the map of this beautiful city that we call Venice. Longhena. Now try to remove the sculptures, the statues, the decoration, the ornaments, and so on. And what do you get? Less. That's what you get. You get less. Of course, not every building is a church, but I think every building deserves a little bit of sensitivity. Here is the entrance into the building where Tadao Ando did his sole work, as far as I know, in Venice. There is also some work done by Rem Koolhaas in Venice, and of course there is Carlo Scarpa if you search for, modernity. Longhena, and here accommodating his vision within an existing structure, Tadao Ando. This is the building where Ando had an intervention, and he was very proud of being invited in Venice. Why was he invited? Well, because he deserved it, because he contributed to architecture in significant ways, and this is why he was invited all the way from Japan. Longhena, born in Venice, raised in Venice, building and living in Venice. Santa Maria de la Salute. Chiesa dell'Ospedaletto, also in Venice. This is part of the urban fabric. Doesn't have the space in front of it to as much as, and it's literally a facade that you see, actually a part of the urban facade, which includes other buildings left and right. But it's still a rather dramatic elevation. It's the church of a hospital. This is interesting now, and we don't think of something like this today, to combine these two functions, a church and a hospital. And I think it might be a good idea to do it again, because the well-being, the physical well-being is connected with the spiritual well-being or psychological well-being. And if there is a church, connected with the hospital, or if the hospital is connected with the church, then it's like kind of an appropriate conjunction between the two major functions of anybody, the physical and the psychological, or the spiritual. But because we don't care about vita contemplativa, as Michelangelo did, and we saw it in the Cappella Medici, of course, it doesn't even cross our minds to connect the church with the hospital and the hospital with the church. But this is a hospital that was part of a church, as we read. I think they were wiser than we are now, because we divorce completely the physical from the psychological, not to speak about the spiritual. Dostoevsky was making fun of doctors in the novel, I forgot, either The Idiot, or I think I'm not sure, either The Idiot or The Brothers Karamazov, but he said, if you have a problem with your left nostril, you go to the great specialist on left nostrils in Paris. But if you have a problem with the right nostril, you go to Vienna, because the specialist on the right nostril is in Vienna, not in Paris. Of course, he was ridiculing specialization. I mean, what is the difference between the left nostril and the right nostril? You tell me. And look at, again and again, we impoverished architecture immensely by banishing art from architecture. And actually, we banished architecture from architecture, because we eliminated architecture from the field of art. Some people are trying, desperately or not, to bring it back, but we don't listen to them. Santa Maria di Nazareth, also in Venice. Apparently, this facade was not finalized by him, if I remember correctly. Very, very ornated. I promote ornamentation, but not so excessively, although Oscar Wilde thinks that only excess succeeds, and moderation is fatal, especially, I would add, with a certain reference, gray moderation, not great, but gray. Look, it's too much. Really, it's too much. It brings you to nausea. All these horror vacui, this immense covering of everything. Every square centimeter is covered with something. No. Now I really am on the side of Adolf Loos, and sympathize with seeing ornament as being a crime. Especially since those ornaments were added later. They don't belong to Longhena. Longhena was an architect. I didn't see paintings by him or even drawings. I searched. Palazzo Belloni, Battaglia, Venice. This is kind of interesting, actually. This second floor is there's a darkness about it. I don't know. It's an interesting palace. How is it called? Belloni, Battaglia. Palazzo. Now maybe it's darkened because it is darkened, it seems. The stone is darkened literally. So, or I don't know what's going on here. What are these black things? It's just glass, and it seems as if it is, burnt by a fire, the building on the first two floors, or the mezzanine and the ground floor. Yeah, here is not like this. It's the glass that appears to be black. I almost feel like writing something with this very title, Black Glass. An engraving from some other time, not Longhena's time. I mean, later time, of course. So another palazzo in this great, great, great city, which is suffocated by tourism. I can stand Venice. I can't more than 2 or 3 days. It's just too much. There are too many tourists. I think Andrei Codrescu, the Romanian poet who lives and works in the United States, was right. Tourists are terrorists with cameras, and terrorists are tourists with guns. The interior of this palazzo is much better because, well, no, I mean, I had in mind the previous building, which was, so ornated, that last church that I showed. Palazzo Giustiniani Lolin, also in Venice, white and clean and serene. I'm beginning to like whiteness after so much ornamentation that I saw previously. Longhena, Baldassare, Longhena. I mean, we are in Italy now, art is everywhere. And this is the last work I show today. I don't know if I pronounce well, Chioggia Cathedral in Venice. It was actually built before he built Santa Maria della Salute. Chioggia Cathedral, Italian Duomo di Chioggia, Cattedrale di Santa Maria Assunta, is the main place of worship in Chioggia, Italy, in the south of the Venetian lagoon. So it's not directly in Venice, or it is. Chioggia, anyway. It dates from 1627, so he was 29 years old when this was built. The interior contains many interesting works of art. It might contain the inside, but the outside is rather austere, almost modern. It has a huge campanile, a huge bell tower. I mean, huge in terms of height. Longhena, as a young man. I went several times to Venice. I never saw this building, although the bell tower is probably the tallest structure in Venice, besides what it is in San Marco. It might even be taller than that. Where is it? Anyway, welcome to some modernity, some austerity of expression, less ornament. Here I am turning against myself. Even the interior is rather subdued. Not bad. Longhena, Baldassare. And this is the last picture of this, I would say, imperfect and insufficient presentation, maybe both on Michelangelo and Baldassare Longhena, but we tried to pay homage to both on the very day when they died years ago. And here it is, Santa Maria della Salute, seen from the poetical waters of this Imago Mundi, in a way, Venice. Thank you.